cloaks. They are ubiquitous, quintessential to that perfect medieval aesthetic. But what type of cloak is best suited for the needs of a medieval adventurer? That's what I'm going to try to unravel here, and I have a tacit endorsement from one of fiction's most iconic characters, so stay tuned. Greetings, adventurers. I am Kramer, your host, your lad, and indeed, yes, today we are talking about cloaks. Not to be confused with a cape, which is a more fashion piece than a utilitarian one, and potentially more of a Victorian invention than a medieval one, but we'll leave the actual history of cloaks in general for maybe a later video. But historically, the purpose of a cloak was to keep the wearer warm and dry in adverse weather conditions. Now, I don't believe that historically we would have ever seen individual travelers on the open road for days or weeks on end adventuring, maybe for some sort of religious pilgrimage, but other than that, people generally stayed around their area. That being said, as adventurers, rangers, witchers, whatever, we need our cloaks to do more. We need them to do everything. They should be multifunctional, combat effective, and maybe even provide a little bit of camouflage. So now that we've established what we're looking for in an adventuring cloak, before we can make any statement about what style of cloak is best, we first need to take a little look at generally the other types of cloaks that exist. Now, I'm sure there are an infinite number of specific designs, and obviously I can't go through all of them, but generally speaking, cloaks can be broken down into one of two categories: front fastening and side fastening. To my knowledge, all of the cloaks that I'm talking about today do have a level of historical precedence. But again, this isn't living history, this is living anachronism. And all of the cloaks that I'm talking about didn't necessarily all exist within the same time period within the overarching medieval time period anyway. So I am merely attempting to make a claim about what I personally would use, sort of taking from history, but not attempting to specifically recreate a specific time period, if that makes sense. This is a very standard cloak, an iconic cloak, probably the first thing that pops into your head when you hear the word cloak. Now, I found a source listed down below that says that cloaks that have a front fastening closure like this are classified as Mantel Cloaks. Of course, there is no picture along with that terminology, and when I search for Mantel Cloaks on the internet, I get an infinite number of pictures, because of course I do. So we'll leave that specific designation out of the video for now. But this style of cloak is classified generally as a large square or semicircle that fully wraps around the body, or has the ability to fully wrap around the body even if you choose not to do that. It fastens in the front either with a clasp or ties or a little piece of fabric or a brooch even, and generally they have hoods as well. I can run into the same problem that Shad did. Shadiversity did a video talking about this specific style of cloak and its combat effectiveness. You can check that out here. Be sure and tell him I say hi. And as you will see in the video, and I will also be demonstrating in the B-roll footage, that you can fight with a cloak like this, but it isn't necessarily helpful. And in fact, it can be downright dangerous. There are characters that are described as wearing cloaks of this style that use them for camouflage concealment. I'm thinking of Lord of the Rings and Ranger's Apprentice specifically, but I am of the personal opinion that a cloak of this length and this design is really more of a hindrance than a help. Now, I suppose with enough training, you could practice to have it not get in the way as much, but no amount of training can really beat physics. And a cloak of this length that comes down to about my ankles is gonna rustle leaves, it's gonna get stuck on branches and twigs, and you might even step on it or something like that. And don't even get me started on the wind. There is nothing stealthy about becoming a human sail. There is the Bocksten style cloak. I do not have one. There are tutorials online so people can make their own, but just looking at them, and as someone who's not super good at sewing, they look a little bit complicated, but they are a historically accurate option, side fastening. and a style of cloak that we generally only ever see on men. They cover the entire left side, potentially providing some sort of concealment for whatever weapon you were carrying. Historically, I'm not entirely sure what the laws were about concealing daggers or stuff like that, but that's also another video. But the cloak, being side fastening, also leaves your right hand free for daily tasks. The reason why the Bocksten Cloak is complicated is because it requires you to cut a perfect circle or semicircle out of a square piece of fabric. Now, maybe that isn't hard for certain people, but I think when you're talking about a large sheet of material, making all of those dimensions perfect gets into some geometry that I personally find difficult. The distinction between a side fastening or a front fastening cloak is not necessarily where the attachment point is, but where the open side of the cloak is. A Bocksten style cloak doesn't have the open side in the front, and you could easily switch it around, I suppose, and have the opening be in the front. But with a Bocksten style cloak, the opening is over the right arm while the entire rest of the body is covered, meaning it falls into the same trap of you have to take that front material and flip it up over your shoulder in order to wear a backpack, meaning your front is now completely exposed. There is also the Moroccan Burnoose, as talked about in the Dunedain Rangers channel. I also do not have one of these, but it is similar to the Bocksten style in that it is shorter and it has a more poncho-like design, and it actually doesn't fasten anywhere. There's just a hole cut in a square, semicircular shaped piece of fabric that you just put your head through. In the Dunedain Rangers video, which is the one that I am referencing, his does not have a clasp. But when I go to look at the Moroccan Burnoose, just out there in the ether, lots of them do have clasps, and at a certain point they really just start to look exactly like the classical mantle style cloak, meaning we can treat them essentially the same and they fall into the same pitfall. They can be shorter and some of them are longer as well. Now, the problem that I have encountered and seen other people encountered with cloaks of this style are that in order to have a full range of motion with your hands, you actually have to fold the cloak back over yourself. Now, this isn't too bad, but you'll see that when it's fully down, I have to talk a little weird in order to get it. You know, it's not awful, but if I were to put the entire weight back on my shoulders here, the problem becomes that the only thing fastening the cloak to my body is the one clasp, string, whatever, that is directly around your neck. And that can be very uncomfortable. You can even choke yourself with that. In fact, your cloak could be used by an assailant as a means of restraining you if they snuck up on you and happened to grab the cloak and pull it really hard. And I'll clarify by saying that by this style of cloak, I don't just mean the classic cloak, I mean every cloak that just drapes over your shoulders but has the only attachment point being solely around your neck, which is every cloak that we've mentioned so far in this video. Now, this isn't such a big deal for cloaks that we're using historically as rain protection because you wouldn't be wearing it all the time. You take it out when you need to, you deal with the inconvenience that it has, and then you take it off when you're no longer using it. But remember, as adventurers, we are potentially wearing this not just for weather protection, but also for camouflage if you are in some sort of fantasy LARP realm where the cloak offers, or your D&D character maybe, but we're talking practical real life. Your cloak might have some sort of positive benefit that you need to be wearing the cloak in order to have. That means that you're wearing the cloak all the time, even when historically you wouldn't need to be. And if you're never taking it off, that means that this becomes a real problem. If every time you need to use your hands, you choke yourself. Again, it's not that bad, but it is something to consider. The other thing is, as adventurers, in order to put on a backpack with a cloak of this style, you can't have it covering your arms. Same thing with the Moroccan Burnoose and with the Bocksten style cloak. You can't wear stuff like that because it completely covers your front, and in order to put a backpack on, or a quiver, or a back scabbard, you have to be able to loop your arms through it, which means that the cloak essentially has to become a cape, and that makes it useless if you're wearing a backpack or carrying other sorts of gear that has to loop over your arms.
Question, wouldn't you put the cloak over your pack?
And that is a decent question, and you could totally choose to do that. The reason why I don't do that is because my pack is waterproof and because I think it looks dumb. Another quick point is that some people might point to the classic style cloaks that have armholes cut out. I believe to a degree that these are also historically accurate. I also don't know if these are for women only. I get that idea, but that might just be because cloaks are more often marketed towards women in the modern era to begin with. While you could cut armholes in your cloak to make it more effective, the question becomes, at a certain point, when does a cloak no longer qualify as being a cloak? Because if you're going to cut armholes, you might as well just add sleeves too. The point of a cloak is that it is an easy, quick form of rain protection that doesn't require a lot of work or materials. If you have the means to just turn your cloak into a coat, that does explain why historically the cloak has fallen out of fashion, because we have the means to make coats now, but it doesn't really solve the problem that we're talking about in the video, which is what is the best cloak for a medieval adventurer. Now, this problem is mitigated in an adventuring context with a few very specific criteria. If you are on horseback, it's irrelevant whether or not you need to carry your own gear, because you have saddlebags, and the weight of it back on your neck, or if it rains and it gets really heavy and it's like really choking you, is also irrelevant because you're not carrying your own weight. You're riding on a horse. Also, if you have a style of cloak that's made out of a specific magical material, say the cloaks of elven kind, elves are pretty cool, so I assume they have some sort of magical material that makes them perfect to wear. They're probably completely weightless, just like the elves are. Also, Aragorn. He gets a pass because he's 87. I assume with that level of experience, he must know what he's doing. And the hobbits didn't know what they were doing, so they also get a pass. Lord of the Rings always gets a pass, because the laws of reality apply to the rest of us mortals, and I'm assuming that you, like me, do not own a horse. That makes wearing a cloak of this style either impractical, just a costume, or both. Now, before we get to my personal favorite, we have to have some honorable mentions, of course. We can't really talk about cloaks without talking about the iconic Game of Thrones style cloak here. This fastens around the chest, not around your neck, with two belts, and then hangs over your shoulders, thusly. But this doesn't really solve the problem of mobility. It does solve the problem of your cloak being used to choke you or accidentally choking you if you're just using it weird, but you can't still, I mean, I suppose you could throw stuff back like this, but it still presents the same problem of not being able to wear a backpack, a back scabbard, a quiver. In fact, let me go ahead and grab my back scabbard harness. There's nothing attached to it, but the harness itself is the thing that's going to make the point. Now, I suppose a regular cloak without the mantle would be a little easier to get on. But we are now running into the same problem that Shad did in his video, where if you're wearing anything over a normal cloak that goes over your shoulders, the entire thing is behind me now. It's worthless. It's useless. It's just a cape. It doesn't really protect me. Yeah, so that's that. That and figuring out how to make a cloak like this that have the straps coming over the front, it's a little bit of a mind boggle. Now, of course, there are probably engineers or something that can figure it out easier than I did, but it was a little bit of a struggle, especially for someone that maybe doesn't have all the materials. It's just not the easiest thing to make. Another good historical mention is just the good old blanket cloak. Now, this one is a little modified. It's not entirely a square shape, but it does accomplish essentially the same thing. But again, the problem we encounter here is that you can't necessarily wear anything over this without it getting all bound up on you. I wore this when it was raining when I played Robin Hood, and I had to have a back quiver for that, and it protected my shoulders still. So it is better. It is better, and it doesn't fasten just around your neck. It covers your entire chest. So honestly, this is a pretty decent route to go, and I've talked about blanket cloaks in my video about how to put together a very cheap $0 medieval costume. So a really good option, a really cheap option, and honestly a little bit more useful than some of the other ones in an adventuring context. But we can take it one step further. The moment, the final reveal. This cloak. This is a Ruana cloak. Now, I don't know for sure that this is medievally historically accurate, but it is a very simple design. It is seen throughout many different cultures worldwide, and because it's so simple, I would find it very easy to believe that someone thought of it in the medieval period, and I would conversely find it very difficult to think that nobody thought of it in the medieval period. So this cloak is essentially just a long rectangle with a slit cut in it down to about the center of the cloak lengthwise. It comes up over your shoulders, thusly, and it just sort of hangs there. And what you can do is throw one corner up over it, and it looks very similar to the blanket cloak. It doesn't fasten just over your neck. It has this mantelpiece that covers your front, but it actually provides more protection, in my opinion, and has the added benefit of being even more versatile than just a regular blanket. So a cloak of this style solves literally every problem that I've had with previous cloaks listed in this video. I have full range of motion, even with the cloak completely covering me, which is awesome because now the cloak is completely covering me, making it not useless. I have worn this cloak everywhere. I wear it just normally in everyday life. Like, if you were with me in college, you will know that the second cold weather hit, I was in this cloak. If there's any piece of equipment I can claim to have expertise with, it is this cloak. I have climbed mountains in this thing. Ruana cloaks are almost infinitely versatile. This is not the only way you could wear it. You could have it fully down if you just wanted to have it hang over the shoulders. You could actually throw both sides up and over if that's something you felt you wanted to do. With just the side hanging down like this, you could attach it with a brooch in any one of these combinations. This tail that sort of hangs down here, you can even tuck it into your belt so that you have even more mobility. And a problem you don't have with this cloak, because it's on the shorter side but it still provides the same amount of protection, is that you can do anything. You can do acrobatics in it, you can sit down in it without getting caught up, you can crawl around, and it doesn't get in the way at all. And with the tail tucked in like this, it mitigates the amount of raw material that's going to be flapping around in the wind. But it still protects you while it's there. And you can even like put stuff in it as if it's a pocket, or just keep your hands in there if you're cold. If you wanted it up and out of the way because for some reason tucking it into your belt wasn't enough, it can come up over your shoulder. Looks a little jauntier this way. If you have the two-tone color, it can look kind of nice. It's a very versatile piece and very practical. There's nothing about it that I dislike. And a la the Game of Thrones style, you could actually take these two tails on either side and tie them behind yourself underneath, so they form sort of a crisscross if you wanted to do that as well. It just looks, just the drapage, it's just on point. I just look awesome. It's just a badass cloak. And on top of that, it's super easy to make. It's just a rectangle with a slit cut in it lengthwise to halfway through the cloak. You could make one now. You could just take a pair of scissors and make one right now. And the biggest selling point for me with a cloak like this is that if it is like torrentially downpouring and you want to have a bigger cloak, a great cloak, this one doesn't have a hood attached. You can easily attach a hood. I like my hood and my cloak separate because that modularity is more versatile, and versatility is key for me. And we can see here that because of the construction differences, the hood attached to the cloak flies off in the wind and the hood that is separate does not. But a cloak like this, you can fold it up in front of yourself and then belt it, and it's another tunic. And you can wear another cloak over it. This cloak becomes an actual garment other than a cloak. If you just fold it, it becomes a tunic. You don't even need another tunic. You could just wear this. And when I'm wearing it in the tunic style with the entire thing wrapped around my body, especially in the winter where I'm wearing my heavier wool tunic underneath it as well, it has the added bonus of making me look thick. And yes, we will do the comparison. Let me go ahead and grab my harness again. So a little bit like the blanket cloak, except also a little bit better. It is still covering my entire front here. The mantle is still covering my chest, providing me protection from the rain. It does bunch up a little bit in the back, but again, like the regular blanket cloak, it doesn't bunch up too much, certainly less than the other styles of cloak. And with this front piece still hanging down, I get more coverage than with the blanket cloak because it's covering at least the left side of my body. And if I undo this one too, it pretty much covers the whole thing. Like It's just perfect. It's just perfect. In Shadiversity's video, he actually talks about how if you wanted to wear a back scabbard or a quiver with a regular mantle cloak, the solution would be to cut a slit on the side of the cloak that has the strap going through it. That way it doesn't get bunched up. The Ruana Cloak is essentially what that is, except there is a slit on both sides, and there's more movement for the arms. And because it doesn't just fasten over your neck, if someone were to try to grab it or something and you had a brooch on, all the weight would be evenly distributed across your chest and the rest of your body. And if you didn't have it broached on or tied on, however you wanted to do it, if someone pulled on it, it would just sort of come loose. And it's not really an issue, which is excellent if you happen to fall into a river. I can only imagine wearing a cloak with a clasp or a tie on it or something, a big heavy wool cloak. You fall into a river and you drown because you can't get the thing off and you're trying to swim up. This thing, it's just done. You just take it off. And because the cloak comes off so easily, if you were to get into combat, it would be very easy to just disrobe quickly if you didn't want to have the cloak on at all. Aside from the fact that it doesn't really hinder your mobility, and because of its design, it could almost act as another layer of protection, given that it's thicker and very close to your body. If you're wearing a gambeson underneath, if it doesn't hinder your movement, I wouldn't take it off. It provides another added layer of protection, theoretically. And the final reveal, my endorsement from one of the most famous fictional characters, Gandalf. I'll bet you didn't notice that, did you? I didn't notice it. I saw it while I was surfing through Pinterest. I found this picture and went, holy crap! He's wearing my favorite style of cloak, and it was my favorite long before I realized that Gandalf was wearing it. But Gandalf wears this cloak. If it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. And we can see that Gandalf's cloak is actually a much larger square footage than mine is. It covers his entire arm, whereas my shoulder pieces only come down to about my elbow. But that's why it looks like he has these very wide, long sleeves. It's actually just his cloak draping over his arms with this style. And Gandalf's is actually more versatile than mine is because it appears to also have a neck clasp, meaning that you could wear it the same way that you would a generic mantle cloak also. I think this cloak design is hands down the best one for a medieval adventurer. It is super versatile, utilitarian, provides excellent coverage, more than most of the other ones that we've discussed, aside from just a regular blanket cloak. It's super easy to make. You can make it out of any material. You can have cold weather and hot weather variants of linen or wool, depending. Just super easy to do. This was not meant to be a video bashing on the classical mantle cloak or any other style of cloak for that matter. This video is not to say that those other styles of cloaks aren't good in their own right. I just personally think that the Ruana Cloak is the best option for a medieval adventure. It checks the most boxes. This was not meant to be a buyer recommendation video, but I figured there will be some people who ask. So enjoy this little montage I've done of all the cloaks we talked about today and what I personally think their pros and cons are. Keep in mind that because I don't have a Bocksten style cloak or a Moroccan Burnoose, that my pros and cons for those are purely my own conjecture. They're my opinion. I haven't tested them. But that, my fellow adventurers, is just my humble opinion about what I think the best cloak is. And honestly, I think I made a pretty good case. But I want to hear from you. I want to see what you guys think of this design down in the comments. Obviously, I didn't come up with this design, and it's not like the brainchild of Living Anachronism. It's just something that I've been using for years. In lieu of like a coat even sometimes. But let me know what you guys think. If you're going to try it, if you have issues with this design, if you think that another design that I didn't mention is better, go ahead and let me know down in the comments. But I am super excited that I got to share this video with you. I've been sitting on it for a long time. but I haven't ever seen anyone else talk about this style of cloak within an adventuring context before, so I am the first, and I would be ever, at least as far as I know, I am the first, and I would be ever so grateful if you would take a moment to like the video and share it. Share this video, spread it far and wide. Spread this video as an eagle spreads its wings, that is aggressively and very often. Please, I would really appreciate it. And until next time, I want to wish you good luck on your adventures.